Senate Bill 674, Senator Nevers, relative to incorporation of unincorporated areas.
Representative Dennehy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill creates a freeze on municipal incorporations from January 1st of 2014 until December 31st of 2015. It's going to be a pause in the incorporations for the purposes of the House Municipal Committee and the Senate Municipal Committee to be able to come together and do a comprehensive review of the incorporation statutes that are in place. They're very old and very outdated and antiquated, and it's caused some problems in areas that are currently trying to incorporate, which wreaks havoc on various things such as their bonding ratings, their fire ratings, and so forth. So this would just put a pause for that, and then in 2016 they can pick it back up. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Representative Green.
Representative Dennehy.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Dennehy, could you hit that again on what this bill does?
Sure.
Exactly? You said it's a study?
It creates a freeze on the municipal corporations until the House and the Senate municipal and parochial committees are able to come together and review the statutes that are currently in place as it pertains to incorporation. And from that, they'll be able to update those statutes and bring them into the legislation next session.
Yes, release that. And is there are there any parishes that are exempt from this bill?
There is.
Okay. Do you know that list?
Yes, I do. The parishes of Richland, Madison, East Carroll, Concordia, Tensall, Morehouse, Ouachita, Claiborne, Lincoln, also Bossier and Caddo.
Wait, say that again. Bossier, Caddo, what else? Livingston?
Richland, Madison, East Carroll, Concordia, Tensall, Morehouse, Ouachita, Claiborne, Lincoln, Union, and West Carroll.
Yeah, I believe also Livingston Parish is exempt. Is that correct? Was that a floor amendment?
It must be, but I don't foresee it in here in the text of the bill.
Okay. So, do you know why those parishes are exempt from the moratorium?
Yes, and I think what they're currently talking about incorporating another town in Livingston Parish. I think there's an active petition. Are they in discussion? I couldn't really expand on it. I don't know if they're actually in petition with it or not, to be honest with you.
Okay.
But there's some talk of it.
Okay, so Livingston Parish is exempt from the bill?
I don't see it in here.
Okay. So I guess I'm trying to figure out why Caddo and Bossier are exempt from the bill within the rest, those other parishes are not exempt from the bill.
You'd have to ask those members who had put that on the Senate side.
Would you have any opposition, since you don't live here in East Baton Rouge, to exempting East Baton Rouge Parish?
Well, I would, in the fact that there's some provisions in the bill that address the St. George situation.
Yeah, the St. George in my district.
Yes, Senator Bodie White put that language in the Senate floor that addresses that.
I don't believe Senator White put that language in there.
Yes, he did. He worked with Senator Dorsey to do that, yes.
Okay. I don't believe that was his amendment. I'm looking on the computer.
Well, so he worked with Senator Dorsey to put it on there. Anyway, what it does, it more or less exempts the St. George effort. They can continue to do it, their petition drive and bring it to election on November 4th of this year.
That puts a short fuse. We're now at the end of May, and it requires the election to happen this November, right?
That's correct.
Okay, because I see a note here from the Municipal Association and Police Jury Association say this just provides for a study of the incorporation process. I would think that would be factually incorrect by leaving out some important information. Would you not?
Which information?
well, it leaves out the information that you just said. It says that it puts a pause for a 2-year moratorium on any incorporation effort, right?
It creates a pause for that period of time, yes. Actually, it's not 2 years. It'll be about 18 months now.
Okay.
Actually, it'll be about a year. If we come back with legislation next session, it'll be 1 year.
All right. So, and this bill was filed for this session, and all of a sudden we find that there's some crisis out there where we've had this law in effect for a number, how many years has this law been in effect?
The statutes that are out there have been there for decades.
And so all of a sudden we find that this is this big crisis that we need to put a moratorium for 2 years and study incorporation process. All of a sudden in this year, this session, 2014.
Well, and I think you kind of...
And then exempt
I
a number of
understand where
parishes.
you're going with this questioning, and to jump to the end of it here, St. George has been addressed in this bill. And
they're addressed differently from every other parish. Is that not correct?
they're addressed to provide what they need to do for incorporation.
So you're singling out St. George, correct?
Yeah, because they asked to be. Their intention was that to do that, to be able for them to move forward. We could have gone ahead and done the moratorium with them, and they wouldn't have been able to move forward. One of the problems, and you had actually identified this problem, is that under these incorporations, when you do the petitions, there's no end date to it. It goes on and on in perpetuity. You know, so
what's wrong with allowing the people to get together and have ideas and exchange ideas and decide where they want? 75% of the state is unincorporated. The land is unincorporated. Mm-hmm. So why do we want to limit the ability of people that live in an unincorporated area, specifically in East Baton Rouge Parish and St. George area, to develop that and say what they want the boundaries to be? And
that's fine, but do they do it unendingly? Is that fair to the cities that are around
It's
them?
been fair for up until 2014 for the last,
right.
100 years, 50
exactly.
years?
And now it's starting to affect those bond ratings and those fire insurance ratings.
What evidence do you have that it will affect the bond ratings? What
could a entity bond not knowing whether part of their tax base is going to be gone? What bonding institution would do that?
We've had that law in effect forever.
And now it's causing a problem. That's why we want to address that problem.
What evidence do we have that it's affecting a bond rating anywhere?
It could affect the bond ratings. If you don't know what...
If it rained today, could it not represent Danahay?
If a bonding company wants to sell bonds for that municipality, not knowing what that tax base of that municipality is going to be, would you take that risk?
I didn't hear what you said. I thought we asked the question.
I wouldn't take the risk.
Okay. Again, there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts, but I mean, my concern is that you're singling out my district, you're singling out the parish that I live in, you're singling out the area that I've lived in for the last 30 years, and putting special rules in it for the area that I live in, no other area in the state.
They still operate under the same statutes that are in place now.
That's what I want, is to them to operate under the same statute that we have. Just exempt us out like you have Caddo, Bossier, Morehouse.
But it's already addressed in the bill. They will go to vote in November on it.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Danahay.
Thank you.
Members, look, we're going to work through lunch, but we have had lunch brought in. It's in the members' lounge, and it's ready to serve whenever you want to head back over there, and we can take turns as we move through. Representative James for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Danahay, this bill has been amended tremendously since it was originally filed, correct?
Yes.
And I live here in Baton Rouge, and I remember it being on the first page of the paper. So didn't the author amend this after concerns from the proponents of the movement here in East Baton Rouge Parish?
Yes, that's why the amendments were made on the Senate side.
Yeah, because I looked at the articles this morning because I knew Representative Green was probably going to try to exempt EBR, and I've read several articles where they said that they were okay with the bill because he appeased them with that amendment, didn't he?
That's correct.
You know how long this petition drive has been going on in East Baton Rouge?
I do not.
It's been going on since July of last year, so you think that's sufficient time to collect your signatures since so many people in that area supposedly want to break off our parish?
let's put it this way, if they were doing if the city was trying to annex, there would be a time limit on it.
And if someone was trying to recall you, there'd be a time limit on that as well, right?
That's correct.
And you don't think that these incorporation drives should go on for 20 or 30 years?
No, it's starting to cause major problems.
And Representative Danahay, our branch of government, the legislative branch, we're charged with making laws, right?
That's correct.
And sometimes we have to change laws that have been on the books for a long time, right?
We do have to adjust them,
And
yes.
just because we've been doing something wrong for 100 years, does that mean we should continue to do something wrong?
No, and that's the reason for this pause.
And that's the reason why you're elected, to come here and look at laws that need to be changed, right?
That's correct.
You're doing a hell of a job, Mr. Danahay.
Thank you, Representative James.
Representative Hodges for a question.
On this bill, I know we just, I believe we're going to do a floor amendment. There's currently a petition in Watson where my office is located.
Okay, and that was the question I had earlier. I did not have that information. I know there's been a move in Watson, but I'm not sure, I wasn't sure whether there was an active petition or not.
It's an active petition.
Okay.
That they are trying to incorporate the city of Watson, which is where I live and
Yes.
where my legislative office is.
Yes.
So I am very against this bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Berkelot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Danahay, there was a question about Livingston, and as you know, in committee, I added Livingston to be opted out.
I thought you did, but
I'm looking at it. I got a copy of the committee amendment. It's 5355, and if you read that section, Livingston is one of the parishes that has been opted out. I want to make sure that that's on record.
I may
Can I
not have
verify
an
with
updated version
staff
of the
before we
bill.
go forward?
Sure, absolutely. I'd like to also.
The municipal amendments were adopted by the House on May the 21st. And they are available for viewing on a computer as adopted committee amendments.
Thank you, Butch, and I just wanted to make sure that we went on record because the question was asked about it and we didn't get a definite answer.
Right.
And I knew we had passed it. I appreciate all your help and
Thank you.
support.
And I think that takes care of Representative Hodges' question.
Yes, I took care of it.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Smith for a question.
I yield. Pass. Pass.
Representative Barrow for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Danahay, you spoke about the bond indebtedness and how this caused uncertainty as it relates to those particular municipalities. Can you touch on that again?
Yeah, sure. If a bonding company wants to do business with the city, they're going to be very skeptical if they don't know what tax base is going to be within that city limits. So if you have a move that you're going to have a breakaway or something of that nature, there's an uncertainty there, and so whenever they want to bond out, they don't know what they're going to bond out at, for one thing, because you don't know what your bonding capacity is going to be, what your base has been affected. That's one thing. Then you got fire insurance ratings just as well that gets affected also.
That's right. And this also can definitely also cause more onerous bearing on those tax-paying citizens. Am I correct?
That's true.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Representative Ivey for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What would happen after, let's say they were not, the city of St. George proponents were unable to secure enough signatures before the November election, what would happen?
What would happen is they would enter the moratorium just as well. And once they would enter the moratorium just as well. They'd be a part of that moratorium. Then on January 1st of 2016, they can start that petition. They can start it back up just as well.
Okay, so basically what we're saying is there's an assumption that they're going to get enough signatures,
right?
And so that's why it should be okay to not exempt them out of this. But you can't assume that they're going to get enough signatures in the prescribed amount of time necessary to make the November ballot.
Well, the prescribed amount of time is the key words there, because there is no prescribed amount of time.
But that's what you're doing.
Yes.
You create a prescribed amount of time.
Yes, as per their request.
As per what?
As per their request.
Okay. In the state of Louisiana, the residents of a community that may not be incorporated have the right, and we're going to take away a right for people to vote. on becoming a city.
No, you're not taking away that right.
You do for
No,
a period of time.
you're putting a freeze on it, a moratorium on it for about a year. That's all you're doing.
Isn't this basically about politics of Baton Rouge? That's what it boils down to, because
you'd have to talk to the
primary
author of the bill.
It absolutely is
Yeah.
about the city of St. George. Personally, I represent a small portion of the unincorporated part of Baton Rouge. I don't live there, but I believe that the people in that district have the right to bring a ballot initiative, and they have the right to decide for themselves. Whether it passes or not is up to them. And we want to take away that right if they don't get the initiative on for November.
No,
we're going to make them wait a whole nother year.
Yes, that's correct.
Why to study it? No, it's to make everything cool down.
To bring
because
those
we know the politics involved with these types of things, and so it's a very good move if you're trying to kill that initiative.
What we're trying to do is to review these statutes that are in place that are antiquated, very antiquated, as we've found out through this process that they're going through right now in East Baton Rouge Parish.
So we need to put a moratorium to review? Why can't we just
absolutely.
continue?
I mean, we don't just do these things on the fly. I would certainly, as the two committees met and reviewed a comprehensive review and come up with legislation next year to bring to the session, that would be the right way to do it.
Right. So on the record, you're trying to take away the right for people to vote for 1 year.
I'm not taking away anybody's rights.
Any initiative that could happen within the 2015 to 2016 time period, you are okay, and this body is going to vote on a bill that would eliminate the ability for people to bring a ballot initiative and actually go to the polls and vote within that period of time.
No, they can do that, but they'll just have to wait till 2016 first.
Okay, but
January 1st.
In the 2015 window, we're going to take away that right.
No, you can start the petition all you want, but you can't act on it until January 1st, 2016. Their rights are not infringed at all.
Well, they couldn't have it on a 2015 election.
They can't bring the election in that moratorium.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Representative Ponte for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You said that these rules and laws need to be looked at because it's a problem and creating issues, but we need to put a freeze. That's the whole merit and then the reasoning for this bill?
Yes.
If that's the reason for the bill, why is it 50 parishes are in dire need of reform and we exempt 14 and it's okay for them? We've got an exemption for 14 parishes that's listed here, including Livingston. So let's put a moratorium except for all these people. So it's a double, which one is it? Is it a problem? If it's a problem, it's for all of our state. If it's not a problem, then we shouldn't be doing this bill.
Well, I would think even though they're exempted, if we do this comprehensive review, whatever legislation we come with next session will affect those parishes just as well, all 64
But in the
parishes.
meantime, let's talk about just the meantime. Why we shut everybody else down except for those 14? They obviously have their own efforts that they aren't as far away that we need to exempt them. If that's fair for 50 parishes in the state, then we ought to shut it down for everybody. Yes or no?
I don't know. I don't know why they did that on the Senate side. I could not tell you.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Smith for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Danahay, in this bill, when it came up, I want to make this very clear that the folks from St. George actually made a request to exempt themselves from this bill by allowing a date to be put on their petition. Is that correct?
To my knowledge, that is correct.
So, in essence, they feel themselves that they can get the petition signed by a certain time frame to be able to have it on the ballot by a certain date for election. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I think it's been put in the paper that they felt themselves that they could do this. So when we did actually exempt them from the moratorium for this particular year by allowing them to have this year. This election
That's correct.
This year.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And are they all, by exempting the others, were they going through any incorporations?
I'm sorry?
Do you know if any of the other parishes were going through incorporations?
The only one I'm aware of is Watson.
But generally, because of my nativity, in not knowing naivety, in not knowing about the petitions going forward as long as they were. This one simply brought to the surface the length of time that individuals have to actually sign a petition. But we do know on recalls there are certain time frames, and other petitions have certain time frames. But this one just brought to my knowledge that these kinds of petitions can go on for years before they're actually brought to election. And I think that to me is not the right way to do business in any parish to have something lingering for that long. Would you agree?
I agree, and that lends to what I've been saying is that the statutes that are there are old and antiquated, and we need to address them. So in that time period, we were going to put forth a moratorium until we can address those issues.
And generally, when incorporations are going on, there's usually a lot of favorability amongst the people who are getting it done. So I have not known of any to linger as long as this one has lingered, because they generally sign it and they go forward with their incorporation.
Well, there's only been 2 incorporations in the last 15 years.
Okay, and so therefore they were done without probably long lengths of time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Garofalo for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Danahay, I'm sorry I have to apologize to you. I was outside in the hallway talking to a couple of lobbyists. What is the reason that we're placing the moratorium on incorporation?
What we have found is that over a period of time here that the statutes that are in place that deal with incorporations are antiquated and outdated by the state, being the fact that there's no end date whatsoever to an effort to have a petition for incorporation. That's a perfect example of why we have a problem. You have that if you're going to do annexation, you have an end date. If you recall for your office, you have an end date. They don't have one for incorporation. So that draws up a huge problem. And so now you've got a city that's hanging out there that they don't know what their incorporate limits are going to look like, and so now they're trying to bond. They got fire ratings and everything else that they have to deal with. That it's totally up in the air.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that for that one petition that's out there right now, that's the concern of this bill?
It is the concern of the bill, but it's the provisions in the bill for them
Why
to
are we
do
going
that,
statewide?
to move forward.
Why are we going statewide?
We want to go statewide so the 2 committees, the House and the Senate municipal and parochial committees can come together, look at those statutes, and be able to make recommendations for legislation next year.
And I understand that, but the moratorium statewide, and it affects my district as well. And there are actually some discussions going on in my district.
Or do you have
the same issue?
You have an incorporation going on in your district?
Not going on yet, but there are some discussions.
Possibility.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm concerned that this bill will affect my district, and I am not questioning whether or not we should look at these statutes. That's not my question, but I'm concerned that this bill will affect my district. According to what Representative Ponte said, and from what I'm reading, several other districts have been exempt, as parishes have been exempted out. So I guess I'm just concerned about all that, and if the intent is to affect the one district, it seems like it would be better for the bill to address that one district and not go statewide.
Well, that is addressed in the bill. That particular situation you're talking about, St. George, is addressed in the bill.
But again, we're still going statewide,
yes.
Correct?
The moratorium would be statewide, yes.
All right, well, let me go get that amendment.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Representative Ivey for another question.
Oh, you only get one.
Not that the speaker says I can. What percentage of the registered voters have to be, have to sign the petition in order to be placed on the ballot?
As far as the incorporation?
Correct.
I do not know.
I believe it's 25%.
Is it 25? Okay.
Yeah, I believe it's 25% of registered voters. Now, did you know that in many elections, many of our elections, we don't even have a 25% voter turnout?
Mm-hmm. I'm aware of that, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what possible changes are going to be studied?
Well, what about an end date? to a petition. Just like I said earlier, when you do annexation, there's an end date to the petition.
Right.
There's an end date whenever you get recalled.
All right.
There's no end date in incorporation.
Did you know that for a smaller city, like maybe the city of Central, that and it may not take as long to get a petition because there's less people that you're trying to get. The 25% is lower compared to, say, the city of St. George, which may be double. So sometimes you're talking about more people. The city of St. George, has a lot of people in it, or the proposed city has a lot of people in it. Therefore, it may take longer based on the number of people. So, I mean, that's not unreasonable for them to take longer because it might have double the population of the previous city that incorporated.
And you make my point. My point is that we need to look at these statutes and make changes where necessary.
So
whether it be 1 year, 2 years, 6 years, 10 years, whatever it may be.
Is how long to make the petition.
Possibly. There's other parts of that statute that are antiquated just as well, I'm sure.
Okay, well, I mean, 25% threshold, that's pretty stiff.
That's something else you could look at.
And then it goes to vote of the people. And you mentioned other things about bonding and all this. Well, in my opinion, none of that really matters. If you have the people that decide they want to incorporate and they want to take on those responsibilities.
So the city that it affects, it doesn't matter.
So maybe
the city that it affects, their bonding rating is affected. It doesn't matter. Is what you're telling me?
Well, let's have a possible scenario like this. What if you have a city who gets a lot of indebtedness? Okay, the unincorporated area receives none of the benefits from that indebtedness, but is responsible for paying that indebtedness. Does that seem fair? Would you think that was fair?
I'm sorry. Repeat that, please.
Okay, if a city that's incorporated bonds for a lot of infrastructure and all that, and it applies just to the incorporated area, but you have the unincorporated area paying for what's going on in the incorporated area, they might feel slighted a little bit that they're not getting anything for the money. So is that unfair that they want to actually have representation of their tax dollars in their area? So basically we're saying that a large city can basically encumber an unincorporated area to be liable for the decisions that they make that really affect mainly the incorporated area. That's okay?
Are you talking about if you have parish city government?
Correct.
Well, parish city government, they're one and the same. You have a body that makes that decision, right?
Yeah. But most of the infrastructure and stuff, a lot of that happens in the incorporated area.
I don't know how that's made out.
That's kind of what's happening in Baton Rouge. So
okay.
That's kind of why Central pulled out, because we felt that our tax dollars weren't being represented so well in the parish government form.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's kind of what's happening in the city of St. George. So.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
All right, Representative Barrow, the gentleman's out of time. 1 minute.
1 minute, sir.
Without
Thank you,
objection.
sir. Representative Danahay, I've been listening to the dialogue going back and forward. Did you know that St. George is not a city?
Yes.
Okay, I just keep hearing the reference of the city of St. George. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that St. George was not a city.
Possibly on November 4th.
All right, Representative James for a question.
1 minute, Mr. Speaker. Representative Danahay, Representative Ivey started to speak about the bond and indebtedness, but did you know that those of us in the city of Baton Rouge have been paying for the bond and indebtedness of the unincorporated areas for years? Did you know that?
No.
We've been, and you know that area of the proposed breakaway city, do you know that they have a very booming economy there, so that they're not underdeveloped? And that area of town certainly doesn't lack for resources. Did you know that? I know you spend a lot of time in Baton Rouge right here for session.
Yes.
Yeah, so you know that. And did you also know that several people in our business community have been spending considerable amount of their resources to be annexed into the city because they're concerned about some of the things that your legislation seeks to address with studying this issue, right?
The uncertainties, yes.
Yeah, so it's also, this has the potential to affect economic development, right?
It does.
Do you know that our Chamber of Commerce, I'm on their side today, but you know that they are adamantly, they have it right on this issue, but do you know that they are adamantly opposed to it as well?
I was unaware of that.
Well, they are, and they represent the business community, well, they're kind of off on what they're doing with education, but with the business community, they represent those folks pretty well. And you know that they've been, spending a considerable amount of time in the city parish with large businesses here that have contributed to our tax base being annexed into the city because they're concerned about the potential ramifications of what's going on with the small group of people in our parish, right?
Yeah, I did. I was aware of that, yes.
Thank you, Representative Dan Hay.
Thank you.
All right, to the floor on the bill, Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I would ask you, I've got an amendment coming up. I would ask you to support the amendment to take out East Baton Rouge. There's been a lot of talk about what was intended by an amendment on the Senate side, but I've talked to Senator White. Senator White has worked tirelessly on this issue, and I can tell you that not allowing people to go forward with the process to incorporate is not what we should be doing. Putting a moratorium on allowing the people to go and decide how they want to have the government treat them if they're in an unincorporated area is not what we should be doing. I've got an amendment to take out East Baton Rouge Parish, and specifically this is targeted at my district. I've lived in the St. George area for almost 30 years. Now, it's not called St. George, it's South Baton Rouge. I've lived in that area between south of I-12 and east of I-10 for almost 30 years, with my exception of the time at LSU. Don't do this. Please don't do this to the people of East Baton Rouge, and particularly the people in my district that want to at least have the opportunity to discuss it and decide if they want to become their own municipality within East Baton Rouge. Now, you can talk about pull out or break up and all this other stuff. That's all bull, is what I'm telling you. It's allowing the people to decide if they want to be their own, have their own form of government. They're not in any incorporated part of the city, and this would allow them to do this. Now, the bill as it stands now, it says that you have to do it this November. Now, you can talk about that this has lingered around and stuff. There's a lot of problems in East Baton Rouge. Yes, it's lingered around. People have been fed up. And I'm fed up. And I ask you to, number one, carve out East Baton Rouge out of this, just like we have Morehouse carved out, Livingston Parish, Caddo Parish, Bossier Parish. We've got a number of parishes carved out, Tensall Parish. So I would ask you to please support the amendment that's coming up. Thank you. Be happy to answer any questions.
All right, Representative James for a question.
We agree on one thing, because I'm fed up with the bull too, Representative Green.
Thank you.
And you know, I lived in this parish for 30 years as well, 33 to be exact. And so you're telling me the area where you live is underdeveloped? You want to come to my district?
I've never said underdeveloped, Representative James.
Well, the folks that you're standing there, you're on their side, and they'll keep talking about how they don't get resources in that part of the parish. You think that's accurate?
I don't.
You don't think that there's a lot of development that's been taking place in that area of Baton Rouge?
I never said there was
not development. You know how many green light projects have been funded there?
What?
Green light projects through the city parish? The city parish doesn't represent them?
I never said the city parish didn't represent them, Representative James.
You're speaking on behalf of a group, and I thought you carried the same flag that they did. That's what they've always said.
I'm speaking on the ability of the people to assemble and decide when or if they want to incorporate.
So
they're in an unincorporated area.
You're telling me that Senator Nevers didn't meet with those folks and amended this bill?
I have no idea. I've never talked to Senator Nevers about this.
Why don't you come read this article on the Advocate that I just pulled up? He met with them, and I know because I talked to him about it. When he filed the bill, they addressed a lot of concerns, and he met with them. Senator Nevers agrees to meet with St. George supporters, and then the bill was amended. Did you know?
It was amended. That's right.
Haven't the supporters of this movement, haven't they told the taxpayers that they'll have the signatures and be ready for a November vote? That's also an Advocate, too.
Number one, I may have read that Advocate article. I don't always believe everything I read in any particular article, magazine or article. But there was also statements down here that was an amendment that Bodie White agreed to. And I think that the truer statement is that there was an amendment in committee that was the best amendment, and he wasn't on that committee, is the best amendment he could do. I didn't necessarily agree, let me finish, Representative James. I didn't necessarily agree with an amendment to allow for a November and make it a short fuse for only that area to say, you got to do it and get all the signatures in and do it this November.
Well, that's what they asked for him to do. That's why
I don't think that's a fair statement that they asked him to do it. I think there was discussion back and forth, and that's what was offered, was to do it by this November.
That's all of the statements that I've been reading that have quoted some of the leaders of the movement. I know they're up in the balcony, so maybe we could get them to nod their heads if I'm lying or if I'm telling the truth.
If you want to allow any of these people up on the balcony, they're here. We'll get the speakers to suspend the rules. I'll allow them to come back here and sit and stand here.
You know that Senator White doesn't speak for East Baton Rouge Parish. You know that, right?
What?
Senator White doesn't speak for the entire parish. Did you know?
Representative James,
I'll give him 30 seconds.
He represents his district, which includes East Baton Rouge. I represent my district, which includes parts of East Baton Rouge.
What does my district include?
Parts of East Baton Rouge. I don't know exactly. Actually, your district is part of my old district.
And you know, and I'm glad you gave me that. And some of those folks in that area,
I didn't get you that district. It was just by the process of.
Well, I'm sure they're probably a little happier this year or this time. I think I'm sure they're a little bit happier that you gave me part of that area to represent.
All right, let's. Your
30 more seconds. 30 more seconds. Never mind. I'll wait to try to talk on there.
All right. To the floor on the bill, Representative Barrow.
I call the question on entire subject matter.
All right, members, we have, Representative Barrow has called the question on the entire subject matter. We have 2 amendments pending. There are nobody else to ask questions or to the floor on the bill. So all those in favor of calling the question on the entire subject matter will vote yes, and all those opposed will vote no. The clerk will open the machine. Members, vote your machines. Representative Marino, yes. Representative Landry, Nancy, no. Representative Broadwater, no. Representative Jones, no. Are you through voting? Representative Theory? Representative Tebow, no. Representative Tebow, no. Clerk will close the machine. 20 yeas and 60 nays, and that motion fails. All right, let's take up some amendments, Mr. Clerk.
First amendment is by Representative Habbard. It is numbered 6036 on your computer.
Representative Habbard.
Members, what this amendment does, it exempts West Feliciana. I exempted East Feliciana out in committee, and I actually forgot to add West Feliciana to it. So I'd ask that you please support it.
All right, there are no questions on the amendment. Is there any? All right, Representative Dennehy on your objection.
I do object to the amendment. We do have several that are exempted, and we need to move forward with this and be able to look at these statutes and review these statutes, and any effort to expand the exemptions, I think, would be counterproductive.
All right, Representative Habbard, to close on your amendment. Question, Representative Ivey, who did you have a question for? Representative Habbard? Dennehy? Okay, Representative Dennehy.
So how do you pick and choose who gets the exemption and not? Is there a fair process that y'all went through?
On the Senate side, I can only say it did. And for whatever reason, they did allow some exemptions.
Okay.
But I'd rather not add any to that.
Right. So possibly a little politicking was involved in that.
Possibly.
Okay.
The whole thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Habbard, to close.
I would just ask for your favorable support. Thank you.
All right, Representative Havard has offered up an amendment. Representative Danahay has objected. All those in favor of the amendment will vote yes. All those opposed vote no. The clerk will open the machine. Members, vote your machines. Are you through voting? Representative Harrison, Representative Jones, are you through voting? The clerk will close the machine. 64 yeas and 17 nays, and that amendment is adopted. Next amendment.
Next amendment is by Representative Cromer. Mr. Speaker, it is 6044.
Representative Cromer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I put this amendment together. Staff added St. Tammany, St. Bernard, and Plaquemines. This amendment also covers East Feliciana also, but we don't have a dog in this hunt, and I know Representative Danahay thinks that the legislation needs to be reviewed. That's fine. I think he's already reviewed it somewhat. He keeps talking about a time limit on this stuff. Maybe this bill should have reflected just to have a time limit instead of a study. I ask your favorable passage to take us out of this legislation. We've already exempted 17 other parishes.
Representative Danahay on your objection.
Rerun.
All right, Representative Cromer to close.
I don't think there's much needs to be said, folks. I appreciate Representative Danahay, but I think his bill needs to be more narrow and to do exactly what he's talking about. Put a time limit on the opportunity to do these petitions.
All right, members, Representative Cromer has offered up an amendment. Representative Danahay has objected. All those in favor will vote yes. All those opposed vote no. The clerk will open the machine. Members, vote your machines. Are you through voting? Representative Norton, no. Are you through voting? Representative Marino, yes. Are you through voting? The clerk will close the machine. 74 yeas and 12 nays, and the amendment is adopted. Next amendment.
It is by Representative Tebow. It is 6046.
How many you got? Representative Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment takes out Point Capee, West Baton Rouge, and Iberville. I'd appreciate y'all voting favorably.
Representative Danahay.
Rerun.
All right. All right, members. Representative Tebow has moved the adoption of the amendment. Representative Danahay has objected. All those in favor vote yes. All those opposed vote no. Clerk of the machine. Tebow, yes. Representative Tebow is a yes. All right, it's not getting any better, Representative Danahay. All right, clerk close the machine. 68 yeas and 13 ayes, and that amendment is adopted.
Representative Danahay moves to return the bill to the calendar.
Co-authors, did I hear somebody? Next bill.